Philippines, like a Heraldez here. Do you know a device that can invoke the listener's imagination to fill in mental images around the broadcast sound? That device is a radio, a sound communication by radio waves, usually through the transmission of music, news, and other programs from one single station to multitudes of individual listeners equipped with radio receivers. So, what can a radio do? A radio can soothe the listeners with comfortable dialogue or soothing background music. Or it can jar them back into reality with polemics and breaking news. There are two modulation methods used by different radio systems, the AM and the FM. The AM or amplitude modulation in an AM transmitter, the amplitude of a radio carrier wave is varied by the modulation signal. While in FM or frequency modulation, the frequency of the RCW is the one that is varied. Now, with the advancement of technology and popularization of the internet, is radio and radio broadcasting still important? Reporting over international airwaves. Radio broadcast can provide rebroadcasted 24 hours in a day to provide most recent updates to its listeners. Stations have the ability to reach across borders and became a source of information for the place that is scarce of the internet, which means that radio is a reliable and effective tool that we can use in times of a radio is considered a miracle because it involves communication without any wires and a significant invention that impacts today's technology.
Hello everyone, I'm Jamaica A. Caceres. So now let's talk about the impact of radio on our society. Radio news in the 1930s and 1940s brought the emotional impact of traumatic events home to the listening public in a way that gave the nation a sense of unity. As we all know, as we all know during those times of wars before, people in our society living in an urban or in rural areas getting some information was really hard, especially for those people who were living in rural areas. It is very easy in a very modern world where everything such as the internet, the news and other informational content is just a few clicks away. In fact, the roots of information broadcast and making it public was laid by a massively impactful technology that is still actively used, and that is the radio. Furthermore, before the radio became an everyday household item providing example of our journeys, it was used as a means of communication and navigation for the pilots, the ship captains, the truck drivers, and those law enforcement, the emergency services also, and many more. Even now, we still see those radios mentioned earlier. This became one of their instruments to communicate with their coworkers or with the other people. So here's the brief history of the radio in the Philippines. So the Kizi or KZRH. So the Kizi was the second radio station in the Philippines. It began broadcasting in 1922. So in June 1922, there are three 50-watt stations owned and operated by an electrical supply company and organized by an American, and that is Henry Herman, where given temporary permits to set up stations in Manila and in Pasay. So radio in the Philippines started in 1924 with the establishment of the Kizi AM in Manila, Philippines by Henry Herman Sr. Henry Herman was an American and a former soldier who came to the Philippines to fight in the Philippine-American War. So the company started with a test broadcast, starting with the first broadcast made from the Nicolas Airfield, which is in Subic. So by using a 5-watt transmitter until it bloomed and had a 100-watt transmitter, which was in 1924. And in 1924, that was the making of Kizi, the second radio station of the Philippines. Next is the 1939. In 1939, there were 4 stations owned by the department stores, which used them mainly to advertise their own merchandise. So in 1939, Samuel Gachas, he is the owner of the H.E.Hika company who founded the DZRH, which was then broadcasting with a frequency of 650 kilocycles. During the American period, radio in the 30s is said to have gained almost as much glamour as the movies, since newspaper attention was lavished on radio personalities, just it was on the movie stars. So the Sunrise Club and the Listerine Amateur Hour where it was the more popular radio shows at that time. Radio control laws were promulgated at about the same time that these outside advertisements began to be accepted.
During the Japanese occupation, all radio stations were closed except TZRH, which was renamed PIM or Philippine Island AM. Reception on shortwave was strictly forbidden. This era broadcast news and advertisement is difficult to those writers, journalists, and reporters mostly when the Japanese era, which all radio station is closed and forbidden the transfer or giving news about the war to our countrymen with the help of the voice of Juan de la Cruz, the voice of freedom from Corregidor, and the voice of America. It was on these hidden radio sets that underground newspapers depended heavily for information of the war. 1942, at the height of World War II, the Japanese invasion of the Philippines islands. Carlos Malonzo creates his own radio station called The Voice of Juan de la Cruz. His broadcasts supply information about pro-American war events and disseminate anti-Japanese propaganda. He stays one step in front of the pursuing Japanese by moving his makeshift radio station from place to place. 1945, the real birth of Philippine radio. Within 5 years after the war, there were 30 operating stations. March 1, 1950, Republic Broadcasting System DZBB or DZBB, started by Bob Stewart, became famous for on-the-spot news coverage and for a new scope of program on which controversial individuals discuss hot subjects. From those early days in past landmarks like the famous Kwentong Kotser of the 50s, a satire on Filipino manners, mores, politics, and government which eventually moved on to television. Carney naman, a situation comedy and Vic's variety show, the formula of Philippine radio developed.
Hello, I am Junale Cabayas from BTLED 2G1 and now I am going to discuss or elaborate the history of radio in the Philippines. So the history of radio in the Philippines. Reginald Fessenden, the mind behind the amplitude modulated or AM radio so that more than one station can be sent signals. So how did the radio corporation of the Philippines flourish? So way back to 1924 October, so RCP brought KZ. So 1926, whereas it began to work on constructing 2 of the largest radio stations with the idea of maintaining direct Manila-San Francisco service. So, third is 1929, so launch of KZRC in Cebu Broadcasting. So, 1932, KZRC Cebu, so KZIB and KZFM Manila. So the last one is 1960, launch DZLT 1188 first AM station in Region 4. So today, the Radio Corp Broadcast Group is composed of 5 Filipino owned broadcasting companies with congressional franchise. I think all radio programs back in the day were English. So they resemble pretty much like those radio shows heard from the continental US. In fact, that the sponsoring were also patterned after famous American radio programs like the Listerine Amateur Hour or the Kim Musical Quiz. So, next is the kapisanan ng mga broadcaster ng Pilipinas. So, kapisanan ng mga broadcaster ng Pilipinas, or we so-called is the Association of Broadcasters of the Philippines. So, the foremost broadcaster media organization in the country, composed of the owners and operators of radio and television stations, so regular members, and the radio and television stations themselves association members. So we move on to call letters from K to D. So KZ was used because of the Philippines was then a colony of America. So all call letters of radio stations in the US start either with key or W. So ang kinakuha ko na sila, key is or W ang kinunhan nga letters sa US. So Francisco Coco Trinidad, known as the father of the Philippine broadcasting, attended also the International Telecommunications Union or ITU in 1947, held in Atlantic City in the US, proposed US of RP instead of KZ. So, but this was denied by the ITU and gave the letter D as a replacement to KZ. So, mga na siya guys, KZ, nakinauna na siya sa radio, telecommunication, or any stations in the Philippines. So, that will be all for our report. Thank you very much and have a nice day, everyone.